Welcome back to the Dignitea, where we take today's tea and infuse it with dignity. I'm your host, Madeline Jones, and I am here with David Witt. David,
Hi.
what kind of tea are we drinking today?
I am drinking some oolong tea.
Yeah, take a nice
Yeah,
big long sip for me. How is it? It's good.
it's good.
I'm drinking some great value Keurig coffee, which BT dubs. Theo Vaughn knocked the Keurig, and I have a Keurig at home. And honestly, I think I might switch over because it is not convenient if you're brewing more than one cup.
True.
Because then, and I'm using the reusable stuff because I heart the trees. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Any
Love
thoughts
that.
on that? You seem like you like the earth.
Yeah, we
Not to
have we
stereotype
have an
you.
espresso machine at home.
You have an espresso machine?
Yeah,
Wow.
makes good coffee.
It's pretty fancy.
Yeah,
All
but
right.
I mean it saves money in the long run. So anyway,
Saves money in the long run. That's how I justify all my purchases.
yeah,
It's like me with lipsticks right now. I'm like justifying like a $42 lipstick in my head, and I'm like, price per ounce is insane. But let's talk about some of the hot things that are going on right now in the US. So I
yeah.
think one of the first things is the election certification, the TikTok ban, which I have such personal, intense thoughts on because that's like my BFF. And then the California wildfires. So let's start with the election certification. A couple days ago, I saw on TikTok a awesome picture of Kamala Harris certifying the election, like certifying her loss.
Right.
And I feel like in recent times, like there's been a rise of the vice president with the election, right? So remember Mike Pence,
Yeah.
um, who certified the loss against Trump, and then now
Lost
seeing
against Joe
Kamala,
Biden.
yeah, with the Speaker of the House. I don't know. I guess recently I've been getting into like the photos I've been seeing because they're just so interesting in the past year, I feel.
Yeah.
They're very impactful. But let's talk about the public's reaction to it. So we have some points from the right, the center, and the left. Do you want to go on the right's perspective on this first?
Sure. So one article talking about the election certification. Um, the headline was 2024 election certification obliterates another anti-Trump talking point,
Obliterates,
which
destroys.
which I mean she did, the Democrats did lose, but the quote was, "So it's over, not much fuss, even liberals are exhausted for the most part. You cannot beat Trump. You tried for years to get this guy and it's over. This saga ended with the greatest political comeback of all time. Trump won the popular vote and the Electoral College. He's earned more votes with every election. Game, set, match." And it was a peaceful transfer of power. And I think this might be where the contempt is coming in a little more. So again, all this nonsense about Trump being a threat to democracy was celebrated in real time.
I think this is funny. I really wish that we would shift from using language around the election away from like war terms
Mm,
because obliterates, destroys, battleground, triumph, victory. I mean, victory I think is fine and triumph is fine, but it's like stop taking these things and dramatizing them
yeah,
because it's supposed to be a free and fair election. This is about democracy, and suddenly we're talking about as if we're like shooting cannons over at Pennsylvania
yeah,
and all our swing states. It's kind of interesting here because I feel like this is like a relatively fine passage if we were to score it. But like there is a part in it where I'm just like, I don't know if it doesn't taste right to me. So again, all this nonsense about Trump being a threat to democracy was celebrated in real time. First of all, the statement confuses me. It might be because I'm getting over a head cold. and generally speaking, I'm confused, just wandering. But like, I think when people express real fears about democracy going away, this is a time to be like, look at, like, this is America. We are democratic.
Yeah.
Kamala certified her loss. Like, that's honestly amazing.
Yeah, like on one hand you have this like proof that the system works, but then on the other hand, yeah, maybe not seeing another perspective or why concerns might be there. I mean, both both parties leading up to the election talked about the other candidate being a threat to democracy, and I mean, sure they could be, but also if half of the country votes for that person, they believe that they're good for democracy. Um, and so, yeah, just I think that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it is. This is what Kamala Harris had to say. Today, I did what I have done my entire career, which is take seriously the oath that I have taken many times to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, which included today, performing my constitutional duty to ensure the people of America, the voters of America, will have their votes counted, that those votes matter, and that they will determine, and they will then with the outcome of an election.
Yeah, I mean, acknowledges the outcome and performed her constitutional duty as the vice president, um, and recognized the voice of the voters.
Yeah. I feel like I would be a sore loser, honestly. I'd be like, well,
I feel like she definitely could have used inflammatory language during this whole process, and maybe there are some things she said, but within that specific quote, um, there wasn't any inflammatory language of the other side or we should be scared or whatever. We're better than them. There wasn't any of that language in there.
well, I feel like with all of this, you know, talk, a lot of people have been talking about January 6th. Trump said it was a day of love. Do we have any context to that? Like, because the way I saw it, it was not a day of love. I have a memory on my phone that pops up every year where I'm like cuddling with my dog and I'm like, my support puppy, because of it's like embarrassing to see the Capitol stormed.
Sure. I mean, I think if people believed that there wasn't a free and fair election and they legitimately thought that democracy was being taken advantage of or whatever, you know, this day of love could be they really love their country and want to make sure their institutions are reputable, or a day of love of really happy that he was certified. But this quote was from 2021, right? When he won the election,
Mm-hmm.
or when he, yeah,
I believe so.
yeah,
I was gonna say something about that, but I don't remember. Oh, I was gonna say that I feel like this year, kind of certifying the election was a very positive process. Like I know there was a snowstorm and everyone showed up to certify the election, but I feel like both sides, even if you were disappointed, I didn't see much rhetoric that was nasty,
yeah,
honestly. Like people were like, look, we lost, we're certifying the election, or people were like, we won, we're still in this for democracy. Like
yeah,
I was that was a relief to me to see.
yeah. And I mean, I think it's totally fair and okay to check the systems and verify and make sure
Absolutely.
that no corruption happened. But yeah, at the end of the day, after things have been checked, then yeah, that's what it's about. Just moving forward.
That's right. Well, speaking of checking to make sure things are all secure, let's talk about TikTok, the ban,
Oh
and
yeah.
national security. So, how much TikTok do you use a day, David?
Um, I am more of Instagram and Reddit, so I don't use TikTok that much. But when I
I knew you
do,
loved the environment. You just even recycle content from TikTok.
I I do like TikTok, but I feel like I get sucked in and will just be on it until the lady pops up and is like, "Is it time for bed?"
Hey.
Yeah. And I'm like, "Okay." So I feel like I'm not very good at managing my time on it, so not I don't spend as much time on it as maybe some of my friends or you. I don't
Well,
know, how much time do you spend on it?
I have a limit on my phone,
Oh, smart.
um, which is set for 3 hours and 55 minutes,
Every day?
which means that yesterday I kept getting locked out of the app and I changed it. Um, because that's how I roll.
Add more time.
I just, yeah, I have no self control. I can't even have it control me on here. But I think my average is probably 2 or 3 hours a day. I don't know how to figure out what it is. So I feel like personally attacked right now, even though I understand this is about national security. It's fine. But it led me to some Pew Research and kind of how much information Americans are getting. So, from TikTok. One of them is that 18 to 29-year-olds, 60% of them are on TikTok.
Hmm.
That is a huge segment of the American population,
Yeah,
at least who I consider what would be my peers in America are on TikTok. Now, what I think is interesting is that about half of US adult TikTok users say they regularly get their news there. And to me, that's interesting because this is a self report. But
sure.
it makes me wonder how many people have seen something from TikTok initially and then maybe read an article about it.
Yeah.
It's like your first notification that something has happened in the world.
Something's going on, so let me go check.
And yeah, I
Yeah,
almost feel like it's probably higher than 52% because like that's how I learned about the conflict in the Middle East that happened,
sure.
or still ongoing. This is how I figure out that Trump and Obama are like giggling and laughing with each other at Jimmy Carter's funeral. Like
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff I see is from TikTok, and while it may not be the main information source, it's like the first.
It's a headline.
Yeah, it's like the
Yeah.
first time I see it. And so I thought that was interesting. But when you look at who they're following and what kind of content they're subscribing to, it's mainly pop culture and entertainment and dances. When it comes to politics and news, it's probably what, like 8 and 3% of what people are consuming on TikTok,
Hmm.
which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
So,
What so what has been the conversation around banning TikTok and um what are people saying about it? Is it fueling to our dignity and contempt culture, or is this bringing Americans together, making us more divisive?
ironically, I think it's making us a little like the support for banning TikTok has declined
Interesting.
since March of 2023. So while it's being banned, support for it is down, and people aren't really sure if it needs to be banned. I will say the reaction to it being banned has been hilarious. I think that I have probably expressed the most contempt that I have seen about being upset that my personal friend is going to be gone that lives in my pocket. Um, this guy named Budget Bradley posted a video that I thought was really interesting where he just talks about how upset he is that it's going to be banned. He spent 5 years posting on his page and like building this community,
Sure.
and it is just going to be wiped on the 19th. I
Yeah.
like you watch it. I just like feel bad for the guy because
Does does he use any inflammatory language when he's talking about the ban, or just mostly talking about this beautiful community that he's built and the connections that he's made?
you know it's. I didn't see inflammatory language the first time. I think I just saw like grief, which I don't know how
Sure.
grief goes on the dignity index for a sense of loss, but I don't know. I think um that video was used on a lot of like podcasts to show the reaction.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the vulnerability. Like if we go to Donna Hicks' 10 Elements of Dignity,
Sure.
I like that like a lot of people were listening to him, but also the ability to just be vulnerable on such a mass platform.
Yeah.
Because I think it is funny because it's like, oh, it's TikTok, whatever. But like people have businesses and connections on there. It's kind of wild that it's just going to be gone.
Yeah. Like just everything erased.
Yeah. But Trump says he has a little soft spot in his heart for TikTok.
So there's a
There's a
possibility.
possibility that Mr. Musk is going to get TikTok.
I did read that.
We don't know how big of a possibility that is.
Um, I I mean, I do see some of the concerns that people have, but I did read something from somebody saying, "Oh, Elon is buying TikTok. Never mind, ban it." Which
That
is
initially I laugh at.
yeah, which I can see concerns, or it is funny, but also like on the dignity index scale of like, oh, we don't share values. We're better than those people.
If Elon
Um,
Musk's going to be in charge of it, ban it, which
yeah,
is kind of like a two. We need to get away from those people.
sure, yeah. Um, or we're
Interesting.
better off without
About them.
it if they are in charge. Um, so yeah, I think it's okay to express concern. What he's after he bought X, or Twitter, changed it to X, and a lot of people quit that. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. I do love, from the user perspective, like people are talking about how they're gonna miss their Chinese spy, and they're like making all these memes about it.
Yeah.
It reminds me every time like something like this happens. It's like the same memes where it's like, my Russian spy, oh no, they're gonna be gone, and like
How are they going to find me?
I just feel like that's like such a social media thing because it really is about like connection with other people, even
Yeah.
though you're not physically connecting with them. I feel like that there's kind of a, I don't know, maybe depression rates are going to rise in the US after this is banned,
Or maybe people will get
or it will go
outside.
down.
Yeah, maybe people will get outside and not have brain rot. Wasn't that a word of the year that we talked about?
Brain rot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other funny thing is that a lot of people have kind of migrated over to Red Note, which
Okay.
is the Chinese version of TikTok. I find this incredibly ironic. I also find this intensely American for us. Like, I feel like Americans can be kind of, I don't want, petty is the word that comes to mind, but I don't want to say petty, but it's like, oh, okay, you don't want the Chinese interfering with us. Why don't we just go over to the Chinese app? Um,
Yeah. I hadn't heard of Red Note until we started talking about it.
it's number, I think it was, last time I checked, it was like number two and number three
That's great.
in
On the
like
App
Google
Store?
Play. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Just suddenly. But it's really funny because a lot of the users on Red Note are like, I'll be your new Chinese spy. Like, and then there's like an AI thing where, the Statue of Liberty is like being swept away by like
Oh my
China. This like a
gosh.
Rome. It's so funny. And this is kind of what I love is that like people are talking to a whole bunch of people in China and like making memes and joking about things. And that was not something I anticipated out of this is that we're kind of connecting with someone who's considered a foreign adversary with the
Sure.
people. And they like brain rot content just like us.
Yeah.
I think that's really sweet. It's a six. They're building
We we
on common
we
ground.
do have more. I do think that that is one of the good things about TikTok. If if you've never lived abroad or haven't traveled outside of the country for whatever reason, like this does help get a small glimpse into other people, and like we do have more in common than we think, even though we speak a different language, have a completely different life. There are these similarities of family and friends and eating good food and making jokes. Um, that is universal.
Yeah, I
Really cool.
remember about 6 months ago there was this. Um, I think there's always been this kind of constant discussion about TikTok and national security, and then people like share what they're seeing on TikTok,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of the users of TikTok are not as concerned because when you look at your For You pages, you're like, like if this influences national security, like, oh no,
Yeah.
because it's one of the videos I saw was this dog, and they basically made it like a Chinese soap opera, and it's just this dog like in the snow, like we'll have to find it and put it. But it was like, how is this
That's funny.
influencing national security?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Um,
Which I mean would be a great conversation if people, have pushback on that of like, from an international perspective of like this soft power of countries influencing other countries, or is it just random people sharing funny things or cute dogs
or
or
both.
whatever? Yeah. Let us.
Ironically, a lot of things that I would say are critical of China, I've seen on TikTok, whether that's showing like, some of their national parks and their when too many people like walk through the grass and now the pink grass is gone. Like I
Hmm.
remember seeing that on TikTok, or the whole Wuhan, is it Wuhan?
Yeah. Yeah.
The imprisonment. Like that was kind of released on TikTok.
Sure.
It was out of control because they have this algorithm that's really good at getting people content they like, and sometimes they can't control it, which is ironic.
Yeah. If
But
that
it doesn't feel
gets
real.
bigger, if TikTok gets shut down, what happens with data security? But yeah, let us know some of your concerns with TikTok ban, you know,
Does it pose
data
a national security
security. Yeah,
risk?
like let's talk about it and see where our commonalities are or which values and
Is
interests
this an
we share.
infringement on free speech?
Yeah, all good points that people have been talking about.
All right, let's talk about something that's a little more hot. That was really insensitive.
The fires in California.
The fire.
My brain, I got it.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's obviously been a lot of destruction in California right now with all of these wildfires, and people have died. And I was reading something that said this could be one of the most expensive, costliest fires in U.S. history, just because of how big it is and where it impacted these areas. And even though, you know, people talk about politics when things like this happen, policy does impact firefighters, architecture, roads, and all of these things that have impacted all of these uh, heartbreaking events that have happened in the last couple of weeks. But I want to talk about how contempt continues to fuel contempt. It breeds contempt. And when somebody says something contemptuous, somebody responds, and then somebody responds again, and just kind of show how that happens. So there was a post from Donald Trump, and on his Truth Social, right?
Truth Social.
He says The fires are still raging in LA. The incompetent politicians, have no idea how to put them out. Thousands of magnificent houses are gone, and many more will soon be lost. There is death all over the place. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the history of our country. They can't, they just can't put out the fires. What's wrong with them? And I think saying all of those, I mean, there were a couple things in there that is this, you know, we're better than them, you know, we're, they don't really share our values, dismisses the differences, name calling incompetence, you know, attacking their competence and performance, which is okay to push back and question somebody's performance and competence, especially when they're a governor or wherever. But I think if you're trying to have a conversation and talk to those people, uh, if you want this contempt back and forth, this is an example of how to do that.
Definitely. Well, I think when I look at this, like that's one of the criticisms we get a lot with the dignity indexes. Well, what if they are incompetent? And it's like, okay, think of the reasons why you believe they're incompetent. So what have what I have heard has been based on a lot of policy, right? And so there's been talk about why aren't the reservoirs full, or why are these fire hydrants turned off?
Right.
Like California, Southern California didn't seem to be prepared for these wildfires. Um, and I'm not saying that to say that, you know, these are horrible people, but it's like what policies led to this to cause so much destruction and loss? Because I mean, not to go back to TikTok, but I remember opening the app and one of my favorite people were like, I don't know how to say this, but my house burned down this morning. And I was like, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's
One of the things I've seen is
so
though, like
sad.
the support, because I don't really care if your home is a mansion or an apartment or, whatever it is, like that's still your home and having that burned down,
Yeah,
that's traumatic.
very traumatic. Um, and so going off of people responding to contempt now, back to President-elect Trump. Um, Jimmy Kimmel talked about what was going on, and there was a lot of emotion and sadness. Their studio was really close to the fire, um, and a lot of it was a lot of dignified speech and sharing common interests and values.
Well, yeah, because he was talking about how communities have been brought together and how even though people's homes had been burned down, they
Right.
still showed up in parking lots to help others. Like it has brought people who are in crisis and experiencing tragedy together, which is a beautiful thing. Obviously, we don't want people to be brought together in
Yeah.
that kind of way. We would love for you to do it over
Different
like a meal.
different circumstances, but yeah, like the outpouring of donations and uh, collaboration across all political, socioeconomic
It's like the worst way to meet your
status.
neighbor. Like,
Yeah.
oh. But what was interesting about it was his response to Trump. Like
Yeah.
there was
Right. Um, yeah, he says, I don't want to get into all of the vile and irresponsible and stupid things our alleged future president and his gaggle of scumbags chose to say during our darkest and most terrifying hour. The fact that they chose to attack our firefighters, who apparently aren't white enough to be out there, risking their lives on our behalf, it's disgusting, but it's not surprising. And then says, instead, I want to focus on thanking the men and women who are fighting the fires and who are contributing to this collaborative community. And I think, like I said, or the point that you brought up of like, we're not, if people want to say whatever they want to say, great. But if you want to keep matching contempt with contempt and not have a conversation about how to actually fix all of those policy things that you were talking about and be prepared for things like this. Um, you know, this we're the good people, they're the bad people. I'm going to focus on this while you're focusing on that. And Trump did say this is um, there's death all over the place, and it's one of the greatest catastrophes. Um, but calling scumbags and um, it's disgusting, vile, and irresponsible. It's a lot of contempt, uh, responding to what the contempt that President Trump said. President-elect Trump also said Gavin Newscum, which is contemptuous language as well. And so people will probably respond to that with contempt. And
Definitely.
yeah,
It feels very insensitive to say that while people's homes are burning down. Like, I'm not interested in rallying. I mean, maybe people are interested in rallying up against Gavin Newsom, but I'm sure that that just insult to injury, right?
yeah, for sure.
I think in this this is interesting because one of the theories behind the dignity index is that contempt is a response to emotional pain. And in this very real situation where people are experiencing like physical impacts of a
Yeah,
fire, I think it's also a response to pain. Like
yeah,
to have that, um, I would find it offensive probably if we were going through a natural disaster. If we had an earthquake and if Trump tweeted something about, this Governor Cox and his Disagree Better initiative, how is that now?
yeah,
Like I would have some thoughts and feelings about that, I
right.
think, because I'd be like, I do I have clean water?
Yeah,
Um, and so I think that the contempt we see here is a response to being so close to those fires and seeing some horrifying things and loss. And I mean, he literally says darkest and most terrifying hour, and you can feel the contempt boiling over here. Now that's not to excuse it, but at least we can understand why
right.
someone might say something like that.
And I also think, I've seen some responses, not particularly to Jimmy Kimmel, but people being like, you know, I don't really have empathy for these people in California who believe these things, or like they don't care about these certain things. Um, and so, I mean, then you have Jimmy Kimmel saying something like this, and the response from somebody who supports President Trump might be like, I don't feel bad. Like, you don't care about us. You don't care about the president. Um, I don't care that your studio burnt down. And it just, this constant contempt of these people violating the dignity of somebody else and responding with contempt. It just keeps going unless somebody shifts the narrative and wants to actually have a conversation about policy or about people.
Yeah. Well, going back to the 10 elements, I think that acknowledgement is a huge one that plays in this tweet because I think the acknowledgement for the firefighters that was missing or attacked in Trump's speech or his tweet in my opinion where he says they're not putting the fire out. Like I can't imagine being so close to that and being like, please don't insult the
Yeah.
firefighters. Like,
Or was it an attack on the politicians for not directing, or the fire chief or whoever for not directing the people, the firefighters, to where they were going? I don't know. I'm not sure.
it's interesting how we can find a way to blame people. I mean, and I do think that we need to look at okay, why wasn't the reservoir full, right? Because people are talking about them trying to save the habitats with the fish, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because this kind of reminds me of when during Ebola,
Mm.
Obama had used a lot of the resources for pandemics or things like that. And they came and they said, "Why are these all empty?" Um, and to me, I think that's a dignified criticism, is to be like, we weren't prepared for this.
Yeah.
And I also think it's something that you can take accountability for, because no one, I don't really think anyone can predict such a natural disaster such as this, where you're moving 5 football fields in a minute
So
on
catastrophic.
fire.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a person's fault. This is a wildfire.
Yeah. And yeah, attacking the policy of the current administration or the past administration, whoever's been, making these policies. How can we fix those instead of attacking the competence or blaming
Yeah.
somebody who's in power for the fires?
Yeah, I feel like contempt just adds more insult to injury here, and particularly in this situation. Like, I'm you don't have to be a materialistic person to be disappointed that your house burned down, to be devastated by
Yeah,
that. I cannot imagine my house burning down, and like where do you go? Literally, where do you go? It's hard.
yeah,
Well, I'm hoping that more people, most of the narrative around this has been dignified, I feel, at least from what I've seen. So I'm hoping that it it lands on the side of dignity, because I think that's what people need.
yeah, for sure.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Let us know what other, dignity or contempt you're seeing around the wildfires, and if it's contributing to this contempt culture or a dignity culture.
Definitely. Tell us what we missed in the comments, what we got right. I know that there is so much discourse online about all of these things, and it's really hard to kind of figure out in every segment what's happening. So let us know your perspectives down below, and tune in next week for the Dignity.
Have a good week.